Byron Hurt is an award-winning documentary filmmaker, writer, and anti-sexist activist. In his new documentary, Hazing, he lifts the veil on a variety of underground hazing rituals that are abusive and sometimes deadly. Byron's introspective journey to understand the hazing culture through the lens of his own fraternity pledge experience reveals a world of toxic masculinity, violence, humiliation, binge drinking, denial, and institutional cover-ups. Byron, welcome to the Color Conversation.
Thank you very much, Lloyd. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, brother. How are you?
Sure. I'm good.
So what inspired you to do this documentary?
Well, there were two stories that really struck me many years ago. The first story was about a young man by the name of George Day-Doon. And I read George's story in the New York Times while I was on an airplane on my way to a screening, actually. And I read the story about what happened to him and how his life was just taken from him so abruptly and at such a young age. And I nearly cried on the plane. And what struck me also was George's mom. You know, she was a single mother. She was a Haitian immigrant. She created a world for her son to provide the best education for him. She sent him off to Cornell University and he didn't come back home. That was heartbreaking for me. Mm-hmm. And as somebody who had gone through a pledge process, you know, it resonated with me. It really hit me hard, you know. Now, George was a member of a predominantly white fraternity. I'm a member of a predominantly Black fraternity. And so there were some differences there. But then several months later, I came across a story of Robert Champion, the Florida A&M band member at Florida A&M. And his story was deeply powerful as well. And I said to myself, I have to do something about this. I can't just continue to see these stories, these really tragic hazing stories, and not do anything. I felt like I had the insight. I felt like I had the background, the credibility, the voice to frame this story really, really well, and to make a film that was really nuanced. And so those two stories really motivated me to make this documentary.
I love being in a Greek-led organization. It's the vibrant community, but membership can come at a heavy cost. We were taking well over 100 strokes per night.
Push-ups, liquor, chug until you throw up.
It's peer pressure in its rawest form.
I didn't want to let my pledge sisters down.
You never should have to die to belong.
It's our silence that's an act of betrayal, but that all ends now.
Wow, and it's a moving and very powerful documentary.
Thank you.
You know, kudos to you. What type of pushback did you get from your fraternity, from your line brothers, from your community about doing this documentary?
Well, a lot of people want to know that question. They want to know the answer to that question. And to be honest with you, it's been a lot of both. You know, I've gotten a lot of really positive feedback from members of the Divine Nine who are applauding me for making the film, who recognize that the culture has to change. I have received so many direct messages, text messages, phone calls, emails with members of not just the Divine Nine, but, you know, Greek organizations and other people who have been hazed daily since the film released on PBS. And people are sharing their stories. They're telling me what happened to them. They're talking about the trauma that they experienced, whether it was physical abuse or verbal or emotional abuse. So I'm getting a lot of that kind of feedback where people are just sharing. And that's really what the film was designed to do, is to get people to talk about this issue. On the other hand, there has been negative backlash with people who feel like I disclosed too much, that I went too far, that I shared too much of my personal story. And so there has been, you know, a lot of negative feedback. But I will say that the majority of people who have responded negatively to the film have not seen the film.
Okay.
Only seen a 30-second trailer.
Right.
The people who have seen the film and watched it in its full context are the people who have been responding most positively. So I encourage everybody who hasn't seen the film to watch the film and to judge for yourself.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, they shouldn't come to a conclusion without seeing the film. Now, I don't want to skip around too much but we'll get to that. I'll just start. Now, you were a college QB at Northeastern, correct?
That is correct.
Now, why would the college QB decide to pledge? Most people think that, at least when I was in school, that athletes, they skate by when it comes to pledging. But obviously that wasn't true. Can you elaborate on that?
I know there was no skating by, in my process. I mean, so is the question, why did I decide to pledge a fraternity?
Yeah, if you're already were you starting QB?
I was going back and forth. I had some quarterback battles, but I started as a freshman, a true freshman at Northeastern.
Wow. Then, so you're the man.
You can say that. You can say that. Yeah, you can say that.
But at least in the freshman's class,
yeah,
right?
No. I mean, I started as a freshman about 4 or 5 games into the season. I got into a quarterback battle my sophomore year, so we split time that way. But I say it in my film. I was away from home. I was at a predominantly white institution. Northeastern is a co-op school, so a lot of the brothers on my squad would leave and go home and work for a co-op job for a semester or a quarter. And, I just felt a void of brotherhood, of Black men, who were on campus that I could vibe with and hang out with. And so I wanted a connection. And then there were a couple of cultural touchstones that took place, during that time frame. I don't know if you remember, but Jesse Jackson was very prominent during that time. He ran for president in 1988. He was a member of Omega Psi Phi. I was really inspired by his leadership, and his prominence, as a Black man. My uncle, my mother's brother, is an Omega, and he was a huge influence in my life. He was a scientist. He was highly educated, well educated. Went to Morehouse, Atlanta University, Brown University. He was somebody who I looked up to, and I also wanted to gain his respect. I wanted to go through the same kind of process that he went through to get his credentials as an Omega. And so those are some of the reasons that led me to want to become a member of the organization. And the last part is that on my campus at that time at Northeastern and around Boston, Omegas were in positions of leadership, throughout the city. And so I wanted to align myself with those brothers, and I did.
You did. Now, let me ask you this. Did you know at that time, at that very young age, what it entailed to get into this fraternity?
Yeah. So let's put it in context a little bit. So I pledged in 1990. All right. So that's a long time ago now, and things are very different today than they were in 1990 on many levels. I heard stories about the kind of things that would happen when you were pledging, but I had no idea what really went on. I mean, some of the stories just sounded so far-fetched that I just could not even imagine that they would be real stories. So, I mean, I was kept in the dark. I had a really good friend who pledged Sigma in the fall. I pledged in the spring. And so he would tell me stories about the kind of things that were happening to him. And to be honest with you, it kind of made me want to do it even more because I really wanted to experience, I wanted to see whether I had what it took to get through a very challenging, very rigorous process. But I still did not know the full breadth of it until I went through the experience myself. And again, I want to reiterate the fact that it was 1990. Pledging was a legitimate thing that, most D9 organizations did above ground. And so, it was just tradition, it was a part of the Black cultural tradition at a college campus. And so, yeah, I was fully down with the process.
Got it. It's interesting. Now, let me ask you a personal question. And you don't have to elaborate on it. Was there any kind of abuse in your childhood? And how was your childhood?
There was violence in my childhood from an early age, not necessarily from like my father. I didn't experience a tremendous amount of violence. It wasn't like my father or my mother were abusive parents. But in my neighborhood, there was a lot of boyhood violence that I had to grow into. So I was exposed to the culture of violent masculinity at age 5.
Wow.
I played football starting at age 7. So obviously football is a fairly violent sport.
Right.
And just being a young boy around my way in the town that I grew up in, you had to be able to knuckle up and fight. You know, I mean, it was just a part of the culture. And so I was bred into that. So by the time that I got to college, being in violent situations was pretty normalized for me. It wasn't until I graduated from college and I went through a program called the Mentors and Violence Prevention Program that I really began to unpack the culture of violence that I grew up in and that I participated in, and realized that it didn't have to be that way. Right? We didn't have to normalize this kind of violence in the way that, you know, I did as a kid. So I mean, that was part of my evolution and part of my growth, you know, as I started to unpack, you know, this sort of culture of masculinity within, the Greek system, if you will.
Right. Why did you take the mentor? Why'd you do the mentorship?
Mentors and Violence Prevention?
Right, yeah.
So, I mean, it was a job. I mean, at that time, I had just graduated from Northeastern. I graduated with a journalism degree. I wanted to get in radio and television broadcasting. It was difficult to find a job in Boston, which is, as you know, is one of the biggest markets in the country, one of the biggest markets in the country. And I had done a lot of outreach work as an athlete while I was a football player with the Center for the Study of Sport and Society. There was a football player, another quarterback named Keith Lee. He was an older brother who came to speak to my football team, and I really resonated. His story really resonated with me. Mm-hmm. And he made an appeal for leaders to come over to Sports Society and get involved with doing community outreach. So I went over. I started doing community outreach, and then when I graduated, there was this new job that was created called the Mentors and Violence Prevention Program, and they hired me, and that's how I got involved. Mm-hmm. And once I got involved, it was like it was extremely transformational for me. You know, I just grew so much, and I learned so much about myself as a human being, as a man, and I was able to deconstruct, the culture of masculinity as it relates to men in general, but Black men more specifically. Mm-hmm. I made my first documentary film called "I Am a Man: Black Masculinity in America," based on my experiences, working with the Mentors and Violence Prevention Program. My film, Hip Hop Beyond Beats and Rhymes, which premiered at Sundance and later aired on PBS, was largely I would say that the framing of that film was largely based on my training on the culture of masculinity and how to interrupt violence and misogyny and homophobia. So a lot of what people see in that film is basically the trainings that I would lead with boys and men around manhood and masculinity, but I applied that to hip hop culture. So that became the film, but I would not have been able to make that film had I not gone through the Mentors and Violence Prevention Program. So, and the same with this film, same with Hazing. I mean, all of this, the work that I do and the films that I make definitely have a common thread. And that's really, talking about the ways in which we need to really disrupt violence by changing the culture.
Right. So now, you're a part of Omega Psi-Phi, so you're on the inside. And there was parts in the documentary where it seemed like you were sort of kind of contradicting yourself, right? Like it was like when you pick up the paddle and you say, what you said was like, it kind of, I'm not quoting you obviously, but you said it brings, it's like, it's an honor for you to have it. And, a lot of guys wouldn't be able to go through it, and that you got it. And it's almost like you're revering in it. It's almost like you're saying, you're holding it up. Like, this is the, I got the trophy here. This is a trophy.
Yeah.
And in the same breath, you're kind of denouncing it, sort of, kind of, I don't know I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it's like you're denouncing it. So it's like, well, which side are you on? Are you on pro or you? Yeah, are you anti?
Well, the truth of the matter, Lord, is that that was the first time my editor had ever asked me that question. My editor actually interviewed me for that.
Oh, okay.
Part of the film. And that was the first time anyone had ever asked me questions about the paddle and what it represented to me and why I would still hold on to something like that. And so, so I was working it out in real time. As she asked me the question, I was sort of thinking through the meaning of the paddle for me. And since that time, I've become a lot more clear about, what that paddle represents. And so I think, yeah, you did see some conflict there. There was some tension, between my thoughts and my feelings. Like on the one hand, I love my fraternity, and I do. I deeply love my fraternity members. I love my line brothers. There's a certain value that I associate with going through that process. But on the other hand, there are a lot of things that need to be re-examined and questioned at the same time, and even redefined. So that's what you were seeing happening in real time in the film.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I mean, you're definitely like on the right path. Obviously, I don't know if you want to call it a 360 or just going in a different direction, but you're in the right path. But the thing, and I think this happens to a lot of people who have been in hazing communities, whether it's police officers, military people, football players, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like they kind of, I mean, I've seen documentaries of guys who were in Vietnam and they go back to Vietnam and they're just crying and, what was this all about? This whole thing, So you see that all the time. And one thing that's interesting also is that like you're in your 50s, and I think 50s is a very introspective period in a man's life. That's when kind of like everything starts coming up and starts coming out, and you feel, I guess you want to say, brave enough to speak out or to open up, right? You know it's okay for you to cry at 50 or 55 or whatever. Like you don't have to have that facade of masculinity, however it was delivered to you anymore. You're on your own, you got your own house, et cetera, and you don't live for anybody but yourself at this point in time. So I thought that was very interesting. I think that's a part of it. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because when I started working on the film, I was 42. So the film took quite a long time to get done.
How long did it take?
10 years.
Holy smokes.
It took 10 years to get the film done. A lot of that had to do with funding, some of the challenges of reaching my goal budget, which I was pretty firm on reaching in order to tell the story. But I had a lot of time to think and to examine, how I was going to frame the film, how I was going to position myself within the film. I think you're right that as you get older, as men get older, we tend to soften up a little bit. We tend to become a little bit more self-reflective, and we start to become more secure in our sense of manhood, and we allow ourselves to be more vulnerable. Some men never get to that point.
That's correct. Absolutely.
Some men never get there, but a lot of men do. I mean, I saw my father at his most vulnerable times, probably when in his late 50s, early 60s. I started to see a new man, that I had not seen, over the course of my life. It's a shame that it has to be that way, because there's so many benefits to being our full, authentic selves and not really performing a certain kind of manhood or masculinity, to gain the respect or the validation from other men and women. So I think that it's par for the course, but I do think that my training has, prepared me for for this film and for the moment, even after the film was completed and put out into the world, for all of the various responses that I have been receiving from it. So again, I feel like that self-examination is really critical, and it's something I wanted to model on screen with the hopes that it would give other people the permission to actually do the same thing.
Yeah, I've spoken to, obviously I know a lot of fraternity folks, sorority folks, and I've had some conversations with them, and it's interesting because, I get the blue wall of silence essentially, right? So I don't judge. I'm not here to judge them, or I'm not judging you, or I might just ask them. And I always kind of get that rah-rah speech, like they're rah-rah for the sorority, rah-rah for the fraternity. I don't particularly understand it. I know why I don't understand it, because I'm not a member. But but it's just interesting having seen your documentary and seen what you guys have went through. Because for me personally, I mean, it's just it's a non-negotiable thing, right? Like, you're not going to touch me, and then we be buddies after this. And for me, since I mentioned the 50s, and I'm introspective, and that's somewhat of a very narcissistic thing. Whereas, like, I'm going to abuse you, and then I'm going to love you, and that's going to create this kind of like this trauma bond. That's like trauma bonding. And I know part of this whole thing is the bond that you have with your sorority or with your fraternity. And I just find that interesting. And I don't know, I know you mentioned it was in the 90s that you pledged. I don't know if they're still doing that. My guess is that they are still, maybe not as much, but somewhere, they're still doing it. And I have a lot of compassion for them. I just wish it wasn't like that. Yeah. I really do. Because, life is hard enough as it is. Right. And God knows college is hard enough as it is. And to, seeing that, I mean, your movie was like I know it wasn't supposed to be, but could you use the music from Us? Was that Us?
No, that was originally scored music.
It had this eerie sound to it, right? Like a horror movie, right? Like something's going to happen. So I could feel the anxiety in me, building up, watching your film, because it was really gripping and kind of like, wow, it really put me on my heels. I was never, I never wanted to pledge. Like I said, I knew that this was going to be like, people touching you and things. And I was like, nope, that's just not me. But I was never asked to pledge either. So it was, they didn't want me, I didn't want them. So it was a win-win.
Where'd you go to school?
I went to Howard.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah.
And I don't know what happened back then. I've heard they might have, one group was suspended or this was suspended. You know how that goes. That happens sometimes. And it probably was because of hazing. Now there was a scene in your film where you have there's a photo, you have a red spot on your shirt. What was that?
Yeah, that was I won't go into detail about exactly what happened there, but a lot of it was not blood. I'll just say it was not blood.
Okay.
I know, it was
pledging shenanigans.
Pledging shenanigans. That's a good one.
Okay. Hey, I like how you covered the non-Black fraternities and sororities as well. But was there an interviewee from a Black female sorority?
Yeah, there was. I mean, I interviewed Michelle Gubadia. She's now the director of Greek Life, and she's also a member of Zeta Phi Beta. And I also interviewed my cousin, Stacy Hurt Milner, who's also director of Greek Life. She's teaching at she's at another school. Now, I can't remember the name of it, but so they're both members of Zeta Phi Beta. And they both, talk about the experiences from, the sorority perspective.
It seemed like also coming out of, it's an 8-week process?
It varies. I mean, it depends on,
4 to 8?
I'm talking about back in my day. I mean, now there is no such process, no legal process like that. So, it's a much shorter process. But for me, it was an 8-week process.
Holy smokes, man. I just can't fathom 8-week process. I would think coming out of that you would need some type of therapy, whether it be physical.
No, I didn't get that, and I sure could have used it. I went right from pledging right into spring football camp, which is another form of pledging, if you will. And so, I really struggled internally, and I really didn't have the tools in my toolbox to deal with, a lot of what had happened and what I was processing, both on the field and off the field. I had an injury that same spring to my knee, which really kind of impacted my playing career on some level. So I went through a lot. And, what I didn't realize was that, I was traumatized.
Yep.
You know what I mean? I was dealing with trauma.
Absolutely.
I know now that's what it is. But back then it was just kind of like, you got to just kind of man up and deal with it. Just suck it up and, be a man. I took on a very stoic persona, but deep down inside, there were a lot of emotional feelings that I had not really let out publicly. You know, I mean, I would go to my room, I would be by myself, I would try and process it as best I could, but I didn't really talk to a whole lot of people. I mean, there were some people that I was able to confide in, you know, who helped me think through some things. But again, I just didn't have that courage and that confidence to stand up and to speak out against hazing culture at that time. You know,
Yeah, you were. I mean, you know, you can't. You were a young man.
I was a young man.
Yeah.
I just, it takes a lot of confidence, which I do appreciate. I mean, I'm not saying that confronting hazing culture is easy.
Right.
It's very difficult, because you mentioned the blue wall of silence, and there's a really thick culture of silence, and when you do speak out, especially publicly, you're going to be called names, and that has happened to me. So I understand how difficult it is for someone who doesn't have the same level of confidence or courage or leadership skills or ability to actually go up against all of that negative backlash. It's very, very difficult. So by no means do I want to pretend as if it's easy to speak out against it. I know firsthand how difficult it is.
So you're talking about, I guess, people who are somewhat close to you, some of your fraternity members have kind of said some things that didn't really sit too well with you?
Well, it's not that it didn't sit too well with me. I mean, it didn't sit too well. The film didn't sit too well for them.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So there's been, backlash, and it hasn't been just my fraternity members. It's been some others. Although I would say most people have been supportive. It's just it's kind of like MAGA supporters. You know what I'm saying? It's like that loud, ignorant voice of people who, no matter what you say, they're gonna stand up against it. So,
Yeah.
so I've experienced that firsthand. But I don't let it stop me. I mean, I'm gonna continue to do what I do, and I have enough support within my fraternity and within the brotherhood of brothers who do know that what I did was the right thing, and what I did was honest and truthful and necessary and bold and powerful and and can be transformative. So that's what I'm leaning into, Floyd. I'm not really leaning into those negative voices. They're going to be there. And as I said, I spent 10 years working on this film, and I have prepared myself for all of it. So I'm not surprised by any of it at all, because what the film does, it challenges the status quo. It challenges tradition. It challenges people's personal belief and their identity and what they hold dear to them. So I know that there's always going to be pushback if you step on people's toes. I understand that. So I'm here to deal with it. Head up. I have my head up. I'm standing on my square, and to me, the goal was to get people talking, and I think that that's what the film has done. It's gotten people to talk. I had a screening last night at Penn State University. One of the participants in the film, James Vengio, was there. He was back on his campus where he had been hazed, and I just wish you could see the conversation. I mean, the conversation was incredible. The Q&A, the discussion was lengthy. We almost had to get kicked out of there. The organizer of the festival said that they usually have people run out of there, when the Q&A starts, but everybody stayed to have the conversation and to ask questions. So that, to me, is an indication that the film is doing its job.
Absolutely. Yeah, it seems also like, and sometimes films are very therapeutic. Was this also kind of like a therapeutic, and it brings closure for you as well? Sort of, kind of.
On some level, I mean, for me personally, it's been liberating. I will say that it's been liberating for me, even though not everyone is pleased with it. For me, on a personal level, to be able to speak certain things out loud, publicly, and to basically declare who I am now, right now, today. This is me. This is who I am. This is what I believe in. I don't really align with people who still think the old way and think that the old way is the best and the only way. I identify with the voices and the victims and the survivors, who I've developed a relationship with in the film. I stand with them, as they, do their work to amplify the voices of their loved ones who they may have lost, or who are speaking out against hazing culture. I stand with those people, and this is who I am today. So you know, it's been an incredible process for me. You know, it's and you know, you either get it or you don't. You know, and that's what I have to live with.
Yeah. Back to the music, you had mentioned you had original composition for everything. I did notice that a lot, particularly the rap, the hip hop songs that they.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, where did he get this? Where did he get this song from? I was listening. I was like, oh, I wonder where he got
You know
this.
you know how that came to be?
How's that?
So I had a production assistant, a PA who worked on an early shoot with me in Atlanta, and he was just like a PA. I had never met him before. He was very quiet. He was very hard worker, but he sat and he listened to all of these interviews. We shot like maybe 5 interviews in one day or something like that, 4 or 5 interviews in one day. And he sat and he listened to the interviews, and then one day he just sent me like these tracks that he recorded. You know, and told me to listen to them when I could, and I put it off for a long time, and then I listened to, you know, some of the songs. I was like, that's pretty cool. And I put it down. I put it down for like a couple of years.
Okay.
And then, you know, my editor and I we were screening the film together. I said, you know, we need to inject a little energy here. Like this needs a little bit more balance. We got to wake the audience up, you know, and make them feel something. And I went back and I did a search for his email address. I pulled up, you know, his old email. I clicked on the music and I listened to it, and I was like, that could work. That could work right here. And I sent it to my editor, and she laid it in, and it was beautiful. I mean, it was perfect.
It was
perfect.
It sure was.
And
Now,
so,
did he do every song? Did he do every rap song on there?
He did every single rap song. In fact, I had a really interesting conversation with Pamela Champion, Robert Champion's mother. And, you know, she doesn't like using the word hazing at all, because she feels like it's an inappropriate way to describe what happened to her son. Her son was murdered, right? And hazing, in her opinion, glosses over what actually happened to her son. He was beaten to death, right? So she wants to kind of like call it what it is.
Exactly.
And so I had this conversation with Domingo. He is the guy who wrote the music, Domingo Guyton, really brilliant artist. And I told him about this conversation I had. I said, can you write something that speaks to that? And the next day, the brother sent me a whole track, you know, with lyrics that spoke to the fact that hazing is really violence, right? And that was one of the tracks that we used in the song, and it resulted from the conversation I had with one of the participants in the film. So he was a brilliant guy, and you know, I wish that we could have used more of him, because he was really perfect for the job.
Yeah, it was excellent. And I also like the animation. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, you know, we had a creative problem that we needed to solve, and that is, you know, we didn't have any footage of what happened, but at the same time, we didn't necessarily want to reproduce what happened in every instance. And so we had to figure out a way to illustrate, you know, the story, you know, or illustrate the various stories that were being told by the participants. And so I had never done animation before, and I was a little nervous about doing it, but I reached out to a brother named Reginald Butler. He owns a company called R Creative, and he had worked with Stanley Nelson before, who I'm sure you're very familiar with Stanley. And so I talked to Stanley about him and his work, and I checked out his work, and I just reached out to him. I told him what I wanted to do. I told him that it could not be wack, because if I was going to do animation, it can't be wack. Right. I have a motto, no wackness allowed. And so we just started a relationship, collaborating with each other, and he brought back the work that I thought worked really, really well, you know, within the piece, to help kind of recreate these stories, but in a way that didn't re-traumatize people and the audience. So, you know, that's how it came to be.
Yeah, it's dynamite, man. I picked up on all that stuff. It was phenomenal, you know. So let me ask you this: what are some, and you may have mentioned it already, what are some of the takeaways that you want the audience to have after having seen this film?
Yeah, this has always been such a private matter, and there's so much silence around talking about it publicly. Whether you're talking about it, you know, within your organization or outside of your organization, I just want people to talk. I want people to be able to free themselves and talk about the trauma that they experience. And I want to give people permission to stand up and speak out against it. I want to save lives. I hope that the film will save some lives, and will do the work of prevention, you know, so that people don't have to experience losing their child or their loved one. No one should die from hazing.
Right.
That's one big takeaway from the film. No child should go to college and not come home because they were hazed to death.
Right.
And so those are the kind of conversations that I want to stimulate. I'm hoping to form a partnership with stophazing.org, the researchers and the team that created stophazing.org. I'm in some early conversations with the Timothy Piazza Center at Penn State University to see if we can form a partnership there, create a discussion guide, and do some community impact work with the film. So that is my goal. You know, I want the film to be transformative, and I hope that it will be.
Good. That's good. It's a dynamite film, man, and I hope it gets a wider distribution. So, you know, in addition to PBS, I hope other people can see it as well. For those that don't see it PBS, and hopefully this will help promote it as well.
Hopefully.
Absolutely.
I appreciate the time.
Oh yeah, for sure, and thank you for joining us. But yeah, I want to ask you one last question that escaped me. So, what is the relationship like when, like, so for the men who pledged you? What is that relationship like? Like, how does that work? I mean, you know, like, okay, you've been beating my butt for 8 weeks. I cross over.
Yeah.
Now, what do we do? Like, me and you, like, you were really hard on me. What do we do? How do we resolve this?
Yeah, I think that's a case-by-case basis. I mean, I think it depends on the individual. But, you know, for me, there was an adjustment period. I'm not gonna lie. It's like 1 minute you're going through something that's very intense and, you know, that's really challenging you and pushing you to your absolute limit, and then it's over, you know, and then it's all good.
No.
That's hard. That's hard to. No, I mean, it can be hard, you know. But you get so welcomed and so embraced into the organization, and there, you know, there is that real bonding that takes place over the trauma, as you mentioned earlier, and it's hard to explain. You kind of have to go through it to get it and to understand it. I'm not saying that it's easy to understand. I'm not saying that it's healthy. I'm saying it is what it is. And there are some really beautiful bonds that come out of some really difficult circumstances. You know, I will say that. But it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, I think that's the point. It doesn't have to be that way. The challenge is figuring out new and different ways to form those bonds, to create value, you know, value with new members who are coming into an organization who may not have gone through exactly what you experienced, and still look at them as being your equal and being someone who is worthy of your respect and brotherhood, and show that love to. And I just think that that's a mindset shift that needs to take place. There are a lot of brothers who are already there. Yeah. I mean, I know some brothers, a lot of brothers who they don't promote hazing. They don't promote any form of abuse toward another brother. So that it's already there. I just think that we have to make that more of, you know, the forefront of everyone's experience. And I think it's possible. You know, I think, you know, we live in a world where culture shifts often. You know, society changes. You know, we do new things. We adopt new ways of operating. And I'm just hoping that this is just another area where we can do that.
Yeah. So you're saying to me that I know Shaquille O'Neal is an Omega. Mm-hmm. I think Michael Jordan's Omega too, right?
Yes.
And so you're saying they did not skate. They probably.
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I can't speak to their experience. I won't. That's for them to talk about.
Okay.
I'll just put it this way. My old mentality would not allow myself to embrace someone who did not go through what I went through.
You said that.
I no longer hold that view.
Got
to me, it's more important what you do for the organization.
Right.
Are you active? Are you paying dues? Are you attending meetings? Are you doing community service? Are you helping to build the organization? I firmly believe, and some people will dispute this, I firmly believe that this film is an asset to our organization. it can help our organization grow and evolve and move in that new direction that I know the national leadership wants us to move in. I hope that national leadership uses this film as a tool to help educate our members at large, and help in paving the way for that cultural attitudinal shift that needs to take place. I still believe that that's possible. I believe in this film. I believe in my fraternity. I believe in the D9. I believe in our entire Greek system that we can evolve and we can grow. It's going to take time. There are going to be additional hazing cases. However, we have to continue to move in the right direction. And my film is designed to help us move in the right direction. That's it. It's a push. It's a challenge. It's designed to create like a sea change, within our organizations. And I hope that people who watch it will embrace that.
Good deal. I think when it's all said and done, Brother Brian, you will be on the right side of history for sure.
I hope so. And I believe that will be the case.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, brother. Thank you for your time. And we'll talk to you soon.
All right. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.